Dr. Ox's Experiment. Chapter 1. How it is useless to seek, even on the best maps, for the small town of Quiquendone. If you try to find, on any map of Flanders, ancient or modern, the small town of Quiquendone, probably you will not succeed. Is Quiquendone, then, one of those towns which have disappeared? No. A town of the future? By no means. It exists in spite of geographies, and has done so for some 800 or 900 years. It even numbers 2,393 souls, allowing one soul to each inhabitant. It is situated 13.5 kilometers northwest of Oudenaarde and 15.25 kilometers southeast of Bruges, in the heart of Flanders. The Var, a small tributary of the Scheldt, passes beneath its three bridges, which are still covered with a quaint medieval roof, like that at Tournai. An old chateau is to be seen there, the first stone of which was laid so long ago as 1197 by Count Baldwin, afterwards Emperor of Constantinople. And there is a town hall with Gothic windows crowned by a chaplet of battlements and surrounded by a turreted belfry, which rises 357 feet above the soil. Every hour you may hear there a chime of 5 octaves, a veritable aerial piano, the renown of which surpasses that of the famous chimes of Bruges. Strangers, if any ever come to Quiquendone, do not quit the curious old town until they have visited its Stadholder's Hall, adorned by a full-length portrait of William of Nassau, by Brandon, the loft of the Church of St. Magloire, a masterpiece of 16th-century architecture, the cast-iron well in the spacious place St. Ernulf, the admirable ornamentation of which is attributed to the artist blacksmith Quentin Metzys, the tomb formerly erected to Mary of Burgundy, daughter of Charles the Bold, who now reposes in the church of Notre Dame at Bruges, and so on. The principal industry of Quiquendone is the manufacture of whipped creams and barley sugar on a large scale. It has been governed by the Van Tricases, from father to son, for several centuries, and yet Quiquendone is not on the map of Flanders. Have the geographers forgotten it, or is it an intentional omission? That I cannot tell, but Quiquendone really exists, with its narrow streets, its fortified walls, its Spanish-looking houses, its market, and its burgomaster. So much so that it has recently been the theater of some surprising phenomena, as extraordinary and incredible as they are true, which are to be recounted in the present narration. Surely there is nothing to be said or thought against the Flemings of Western Flanders. They are a well-to-do folk, wise, prudent, sociable, with even tempers, hospitable, perhaps a little heavy in conversation as in mind. But this does not explain why one of the most interesting towns of their district has yet to appear on modern maps. This omission is certainly to be regretted. If only history, or in default of history the chronicles, or in default of chronicles the traditions of the country, made mention of Quiquendone. But no, neither atlases, guides, nor itineraries speak of it. M. Joanne himself, that energetic hunter after small towns, says not a word of it. It might be readily conceived that this silence would injure the commerce, the industries, of the town. But let us hasten to add that Quiquendone has neither industry nor commerce, and that it does very well without them. Its barley sugar and whipped cream are consumed on the spot. None is exported. In short, the Quiquendonians have no need of anybody. Their desires are limited, their existence is a modest one. They are calm, moderate, phlegmatic. In a word, they are Flemings, such as are still to be met with sometimes between the Scheldt and the North Sea. Chapter 2. In which the burgomaster Van Tricas and the councillor Nicklaus consult about the affairs of the town. You think so? Asked the burgomaster. I think so, replied the councillor, after some minutes of silence. You see, we must not act hastily, resumed the burgomaster. We have been talking over this grave matter for 10 years, replied the councillor Nicklaus, and I confess to you, my worthy Van Tricas, that I cannot yet take it upon myself to come to a decision. I quite understand your hesitation, said the burgomaster, who did not speak until after a good quarter of an hour of reflection. I quite understand it, and I fully share it. We shall do wisely to decide upon nothing without a more careful examination of the question. It is certain, replied Nicklaus, that this post of civil commissary is useless in so peaceful a town as Quiquendone. Our predecessor, said Van Tricas gravely, our predecessor never said, never would have dared to say, that anything is certain. Every affirmation is subject to awkward qualifications. The councillor nodded his head slowly in token of assent. Then he remained silent for nearly half an hour. After this lapse of time, during which neither the councillor nor the burgomaster moved so much as a finger, Nicklaus asked Van Tricas whether his predecessor, of some 20 years before, had not thought of suppressing this office of civil commissary, which each year cost the town of Quiquendone the sum of 1,375 francs and some centimes. I believe he did, replied the burgomaster, carrying his hand with majestic deliberation to his ample brow. But the worthy man died without having dared to make up his mind, either as to this or any other administrative measure. He was a sage. Why should I not do as he did? Councillor Nicholas was incapable of originating any objection to the burgomaster's opinion. The man who dies, added Van Trichus solemnly, without ever having decided upon anything during his life, has very nearly attained to perfection. This said, the burgomaster pressed a bell with the end of his little finger, which gave forth a muffled sound, which seemed less a sound than a sigh. Presently some light steps glided softly across the tile floor. A mouse would not have made less noise, running over a thick carpet. The door of the room opened, turning on its well-oiled hinges. A young girl with long blonde tresses made her appearance. It was Suzel van Trichus, the burgomaster's only daughter. She handed her father a pipe, filled to the brim, and a small copper brazier, spoke not a word, and disappeared at once, making no more noise at her exit than at her entrance. She handed her father a pipe. The worthy burgomaster lighted his pipe, and was soon hidden in a cloud of bluish smoke, leaving Councillor Nicholas plunged in the most absorbing thought. The room in which these two notable personages, charged with the government of Quiquendone, were talking, was a parlor richly adorned with carvings in dark wood. A lofty fireplace, in which an oak might have been burned or an ox roasted, occupied the whole of one of the sides of the room. Opposite to it was a trellised window, the painted glass of which toned down the brightness of the sunbeams. In an antique frame above the chimney-piece appeared the portrait of some worthy man, attributed to Memling, which no doubt represented an ancestor of the Van Trichuses, whose authentic genealogy dates back to the 14th century, the period when the Flemings and Guy de Dampierre were engaged in wars with the Emperor Rudolph of Habsburg. This parlor was the principal apartment of the burgomaster's house, which was one of the pleasantest in Quiquendone. Built in the Flemish style, with all the abruptness, quaintness, and picturesqueness of pointed architecture, it was considered one of the most curious monuments of the town. A Carthusian convent, or a deaf and dumb asylum, was not more silent than this mansion. Noise had no existence there. People did not walk but glided about in it. They did not speak, they murmured. There was not, however, any lack of women in the house, which, in addition to the burgomaster Van Trichus himself, sheltered his wife, Madame Bridget Van Trichus, his daughter, Suzel Van Trichus, and his domestic, Loch Janchu. We may also mention the burgomaster's sister, Aunt Hermance, an elderly maiden who still bore the nickname of Tatymance, which her niece Suzel had given her when a child. But in spite of all these elements of discord and noise, the burgomaster's house was as calm as a desert. The burgomaster was some 50 years old, neither fat nor lean, neither short nor tall, neither rubicund nor pale, neither gay nor sad, neither contented nor discontented, neither energetic nor dull, neither proud nor humble, neither good nor bad, neither generous nor miserly, neither courageous nor cowardly, neither too much nor too little of anything. A man notably moderate in all respects, whose invariable slowness of motion, slightly hanging lower jaw, prominent eyebrows, massive forehead, smooth as a copper plate and without a wrinkle, would at once have betrayed to a physiognomist that the burgomaster Van Trichus was phlegm personified. Never, either from anger or passion, had any emotion whatever hastened the beating of this man's heart, or flushed his face. Never had his pupils contracted under the influence of any irritation, however ephemeral. He invariably wore good clothes, neither too large nor too small, which he never seemed to wear out. He was shod with large square shoes with triple soles and silver buckles, which lasted so long that his shoemaker was in despair. Upon his head, he wore a large hat which dated from the period when Flanders was separated from Holland, so that this venerable masterpiece was at least 40 years old. But what would you have? It is the passions which wear out body as well as soul, the clothes as well as the body, and our worthy burgomaster, apathetic, indolent, indifferent, was passionate in nothing. He wore nothing out, not even himself, and he considered himself the very man to administer the affairs of Quiquendone and its tranquil population. The town, indeed, was not less calm than the Van Trichus mansion. It was in this peaceful dwelling that the burgomaster reckoned on attaining the utmost limit of human existence, after having, however, seen the good Madame Bridget Van Trichus, his wife, precede him to the tomb, where, surely, she would not find a more profound repose than that she had enjoyed on earth for 60 years. This demands explanation. The Van Trichus family might well call itself the Genot family. This is why. Everyone knows that the knife of this typical personage is as celebrated as its proprietor, and not less incapable of wearing out, thanks to the double operation, incessantly repeated, of replacing the handle when it is worn out and the blade when it becomes worthless. A precisely similar operation had been going on from time immemorial in the Van Tricas family, to which nature had lent herself with more than usual complacency. For it had invariably happened that a Van Tricas, when left a widower, had remarried a Van Tricas younger than himself, who, becoming in turn a widow, had married again a Van Tricas younger than herself, and so on, without a break in the continuity, from generation to generation. Each died in his or her turn with mechanical regularity. Thus the worthy Madame Bridget Van Tricas had now her second husband, and, unless she violated her every duty, would precede her spouse, he being 10 years younger than herself, to the other world, to make room for a new Madame Van Tricas. Upon this the burgomaster calmly counted, that the family tradition might not be broken. Such was this mansion, peaceful and silent, of which the doors never creaked, the windows never rattled, the floors never groaned, the chimneys never roared, the weathercocks never grated, the furniture never squeaked, the locks never clanked, and the occupants never made more noise than their shadows. The god Harpocrates would certainly have chosen it for the temple of silence. The worthy Madame Bridget Van Tricas had now her second husband. Chapter 3, in which the commissary Passoff enters as noisily as unexpectedly. When the interesting conversation which has been narrated began, it was 3:15 in the afternoon. It was at 4:15 that Van Tricas lighted his enormous pipe, which could hold a quart of tobacco, and it was at 35 minutes past 5 that he finished smoking it. All this time, the two comrades did not exchange a single word. About 6 o'clock the councillor, who had a habit of speaking in a very summary manner, resumed in these words. "So we decide." "To decide nothing," replied the burgomaster. "I think, on the whole, that you are right, Van Tricas." "I think so too, Nicholas. We will take steps with reference to the civil commissary when we have more light on the subject later on. There is no need for a month yet." "Nor even for a year," replied Nicholas, unfolding his pocket handkerchief and calmly applying it to his nose. There was another silence of nearly a quarter of an hour. Nothing disturbed this repeated pause in the conversation, not even the appearance of the house dog Lento, who, not less phlegmatic than his master, came to pay his respects in the parlor. Noble dog, a model for his race. Had he been made of pasteboard with wheels on his paws, he would not have made less noise during his stay. Towards 8 o'clock, after Lotch had brought the antique lamp of polished glass, the burgomaster said to the councillor, "We have no other urgent matter to consider." "No, Van Tricas, none that I know of." "Have I not been told, though," asked the burgomaster, "that the tower of the Oudenarde gate is likely to tumble down?" "Ah," replied the councillor, "really, I should not be astonished if it fell on some passer-by any day." "Oh, before such a misfortune happens, I hope, we shall have come to a decision on the subject of this tower." "I hope so, Van Tricas. There are more pressing matters to decide." "No doubt, the question of the leather market, for instance." "What, is it still burning?" "Still burning, and has been for the last 3 weeks." "Have we not decided in council to let it burn?" "Yes, Van Tricas, on your motion." "Was not that the surest and simplest way to deal with it?" "Without doubt." "Well, let us wait, is that all?" "All," replied the councillor, scratching his head, as if to assure himself that he had not forgotten anything important. "Ah," exclaimed the burgomaster, "haven't you also heard something of an escape of water which threatens to inundate the low quarter of St. Jacques?" "I have. It is indeed unfortunate that this escape of water did not happen above the leather market. It would naturally have checked the fire, and would thus have saved us a good deal of discussion." "What can you expect, Nicholas? There is nothing so illogical as accidents. They are bound by no rules, and we cannot profit by one, as we might wish, to remedy another." It took Van Tricas's companion some time to digest this fine observation. "Well, but," resumed the councillor Nicholas, after the lapse of some moments, "we have not spoken of our great affair." "What great affair? Have we then a great affair?" asked the burgomaster. "No doubt about lighting the town." "Oh yes, if my memory serves me, You are referring to the lighting plan of Dr. Ox. Precisely. It is going on, Niklas, replied the burgomaster. They are already laying the pipes, and the works are entirely completed. Perhaps we have hurried a little in this matter, said the councillor, shaking his head. Perhaps, but our excuse is that Dr. Ox bears the whole expense of his experiment. It will not cost us a sou. That, true enough, is our excuse. Moreover, we must advance with the age. If the experiment succeeds, Quiquendone will be the first town in Flanders to be lighted with the oxy. What is the gas called? Oxyhydric gas. Well, oxyhydric gas, then. At this moment, the door opened, and Locke came in to tell the burgomaster that his supper was ready. Councillor Niklas rose to take leave of Van Trichas, whose appetite had been stimulated by so many affairs discussed and decisions taken, and it was agreed that the Council of Notables should be convened, after a reasonably long delay, to determine whether a decision should be provisionally arrived at with reference to the really urgent matter of the Oudenarde gate. The two worthy administrators then directed their steps towards the street door, the one conducting the other. The councillor, having reached the last step, lighted a little lantern to guide him through the obscure streets of Quiquendone, which Dr. Ox had not yet lighted. It was a dark October night, and a light fog overshadowed the town. Niklas's preparations for departure consumed at least a quarter of an hour, for, after having lighted his lantern, he had to put on his big cowskin socks and his sheepskin gloves. Then he put up the furred collar of his overcoat, turned the brim of his felt hat down over his eyes, grasped his heavy crow-beaked umbrella, and got ready to start. When Locke, however, who was lighting her master, was about to draw the bars of the door, an unexpected noise arose outside. Yes, strange as the thing seems, a noise, a real noise, such as the town had certainly not heard since the taking of the donjon by the Spaniards in 1513, terrible noise, awoke the long-dormant echoes of the venerable Van Trichas mansion. Someone knocked heavily upon this door, hitherto virgin to brutal touch. Redoubled knocks were given with some blunt implement, probably a knotty stick, wielded by a vigorous arm. With the strokes were mingled cries and calls. These words were distinctly heard. Monsieur Van Trichas, Monsieur the Burgomaster, open, open quickly. The Burgomaster and the councillor, absolutely astounded, looked at each other speechless. This passed their comprehension. If the old culverin of the chateau, which had not been used since 1385, had been let off in the parlor, the dwellers in the Van Trichas mansion would not have been more dumbfoundered. Meanwhile, the blows and cries were redoubled. Locke, recovering her coolness, had plucked up courage to speak. Who is there? It is I. Who are you? The commissary Passoff. The commissary Passoff, the very man whose office it had been contemplated to suppress for 10 years. What had happened then? Could the Burgundians have invaded Quiquendone, as they did in the 14th century? No event of less importance could have so moved Commissary Passoff, who in no degree yielded the palm to the burgomaster himself for calmness and phlegm. On a sign from Van Trichas, for the worthy man could not have articulated a syllable, the bar was pushed back and the door opened. Commissary Passoff flung himself into the antechamber. One would have thought there was a hurricane. "What's the matter, Monsieur the Commissary?" asked Locke, a brave woman who did not lose her head under the most trying circumstances. "What's the matter?" replied Passoff, whose big round eyes expressed a genuine agitation. "The matter is that I have just come from Dr. Ox's, who has been holding a reception, and that there." "I have just come from Dr. Ox's." "There?" "There I have witnessed such an altercation as, Monsieur the Burgomaster, they have been talking politics." "Politics?" repeated Van Trichas, running his fingers through his wig. "Politics," resumed Commissary Passoff, "which has not been done for perhaps 100 years at Quiquendone." Then the discussion got warm, and the advocate, André Schutt, and the doctor, Dominique Custos, became so violent that it may be they will call each other out. "Call each other out," cried the councillor. A duel at Quiquendone, and what did Advocate Schutt and Dr. Gustos say? "Just this, Monsieur Advocate," said the doctor to his adversary. "You go too far, it seems to me, and you do not take sufficient care to control your words." The burgomaster Van Trichas clasped his hands. The counselor turned pale and let his lantern fall. The commissary shook his head. That a phrase so evidently irritating should be pronounced by two of the principal men in the country. This Dr. Custos, muttered Van Trichus, is decidedly a dangerous man, a harebrained fellow, come gentlemen. On this, Councillor Niklaus and the commissary accompanied the burgomaster into the parlor. Chapter 4, in which Dr. Ox reveals himself as a physiologist of the first rank and as an audacious experimentalist. Who, then, was this personage, known by the singular name of Dr. Ox? An original character for certain, but at the same time a bold savant, a physiologist, whose works were known and highly estimated throughout learned Europe, a happy rival of the Davies, the Daltons, the Bostocks, the Menzies, the Godwins, the Vierorts, of all those noble minds who have placed physiology among the highest of modern sciences. Dr. Ox was a man of medium size and height, aged, but we cannot state his age, any more than his nationality. Besides, it matters little. Let it suffice that he was a strange personage, impetuous and hot-blooded, a regular oddity out of one of Hoffmann's volumes, and one who contrasted amusingly enough with the good people of Quiquendone. He had an imperturbable confidence both in himself and in his doctrines. Always smiling, walking with head erect and shoulders thrown back in a free and unconstrained manner, with a steady gaze, large open nostrils, a vast mouth which inhaled the air in liberal draughts, his appearance was far from unpleasing. He was full of animation, well proportioned in all parts of his bodily mechanism, with quicksilver in his veins and a most elastic step. He could never stop still in one place, and relieved himself with impetuous words and a superabundance of gesticulations. Was Dr. Ox rich, then, that he should undertake to light a whole town at his expense? Probably, as he permitted himself to indulge in such extravagance, and this is the only answer we can give to this indiscreet question. Dr. Ox had arrived at Quiquendone 5 months before, accompanied by his assistant, who answered to the name of Gedion Ygin, a tall, dried-up, thin man, haughty, but not less vivacious than his master. And next, why had Dr. Ox made the proposition to light the town at his own expense? Why had he, of all the Flemings, selected the peaceable Quiquendonians to endow their town with the benefits of an unheard-of system of lighting? Did he not, under this pretext, design to make some great physiological experiment by operating in anima vili? In short, what was this original personage about to attempt? We know not, as Dr. Ox had no confidant except his assistant Ygin, who, moreover, obeyed him blindly. In appearance, at least, Dr. Ox had agreed to light the town, which had much need of it, especially at night, as Commissary Passoff wittily said. Works for producing a lighting gas had accordingly been established. The gasometers were ready for use, and the main pipes, running beneath the street pavements, would soon appear in the form of burners in the public edifices and the private houses of certain friends of progress. Van Trichus and Niklaus, in their official capacity, and some other worthies, thought they ought to allow this modern light to be introduced into their dwellings. If the reader has not forgotten, it was said, during the long conversation of the councillor and the burgomaster, that the lighting of the town was to be achieved, not by the combustion of common carburetted hydrogen, produced by distilling coal, but by the use of a more modern and 20-fold more brilliant gas, oxyhydric gas, produced by mixing hydrogen and oxygen. The doctor, who was an able chemist as well as an ingenious physiologist, knew how to obtain this gas in great quantity and of good quality, not by using manganate of soda, according to the method of M. Tessie du Mate, but by the direct decomposition of slightly acidulated water, by means of a battery made of new elements, invented by himself. Thus there were no costly materials, no platinum, no retorts, no combustibles, no delicate machinery to produce the two gases separately. An electric current was sent through large basins full of water, and the liquid was decomposed into its two constituent parts, oxygen and hydrogen. The oxygen passed off at one end, the hydrogen, of double the volume of its late associate, at the other. As a necessary precaution, they were collected in separate reservoirs, for their mixture would have produced a frightful explosion if it had become ignited. Thence the pipes were to convey them separately to the various burners, which would be so placed as to prevent all chance of explosion. Thus a remarkably brilliant flame would be obtained, whose light would rival the electric light, which, as everybody knows, is, according to Casselman's experiments, equal to that of 1171 wax candles, not one more nor one less. It was certain that the town of Quiquendone would, by this liberal contrivance, gain a splendid lighting, But Dr. Ox and his assistant took little account of this, as will be seen in the sequel. The day after that, on which Commissary Passoff had made his noisy entrance into the burgomaster's parlor, Jetty and Ijin and Dr. Ox were talking in the laboratory which both occupied in common, on the ground floor of the principal building of the gasworks. "Well, Ijin, well," cried the doctor, rubbing his hands. "You saw, at my reception yesterday, the cool-bloodedness of these worthy Quickwindonians. For animation they are midway between sponges and coral. You saw them disputing and irritating each other by voice and gesture? They are already metamorphosed, morally and physically. And this is only the beginning. Wait till we treat them to a big dose." "Indeed, master," replied Ijin, scratching his sharp nose with the end of his forefinger, "the experiment begins well, and if I had not prudently closed the supply tap, I know not what would have happened." "You heard shut the advocate and custos the doctor?" resumed Dr. Ox. The phrase was by no means ill-natured in itself, but, in the mouth of a Quickwindonian, it is worth all the insults which the Homeric heroes hurled at each other before drawing their swords. Ah, these Flemings! You'll see what we shall do some day. "We shall make them ungrateful," replied Ijin, in the tone of a man who esteems the human race at its just worth. "Bah," said the doctor, "what matters it whether they think well or ill of us so long as our experiment succeeds?" "Besides," returned the assistant, smiling with a malicious expression, "is it not to be feared that, in producing such an excitement in their respiratory organs, we shall somewhat injure the lungs of these good people of Quickwindone? So much the worse for them. It is in the interests of science. What would you say if the dogs or frogs refused to lend themselves to the experiments of vivisection? It is in the interests of science. It is probable that if the frogs and dogs were consulted, they would offer some objection. But Dr. Ox imagined that he had stated an unanswerable argument, for he heaved a great sigh of satisfaction. "After all, master, you are right," replied Ijin, as if quite convinced. "We could not have hit upon better subjects than these people of Quickwindone for our experiment." "We could not," said the doctor, slowly articulating each word. "Have you felt the pulse of any of them?" "Some hundreds." "And what is the average pulsation you found?" "Not 50 per minute. See, this is a town where there has not been the shadow of a discussion for a century, where the carmen don't swear, where the coachmen don't insult each other, where horses don't run away, where the dogs don't bite, where the cats don't scratch. A town where the police court has nothing to do from one year's end to another. A town where people do not grow enthusiastic about anything, either about art or business. A town where the gendarmes are a sort of myth, and in which an indictment has not been drawn up for 100 years. A town, in short, where for 3 centuries nobody has struck a blow with his fist or so much as exchanged a slap in the face. You see, Ijin, that this cannot last, and that we must change it all." "Perfectly, perfectly," cried the enthusiastic assistant. "And have you analyzed the air of this town, master?" "I have not failed to do so. 79 parts of azote and 21 of oxygen, carbonic acid and steam in a variable quantity. These are the ordinary proportions." "Good, doctor, good," replied Ijin. "The experiment will be made on a large scale and will be decisive." "And if it is decisive," added Dr. Ox triumphantly, "we shall reform the world." Chapter 5, in which the burgomaster and the councillor pay a visit to Dr. Ox, and what follows. The councillor Niklaus and the burgomaster Van Trikas at last knew what it was to have an agitated night. The grave event which had taken place at Dr. Ox's house actually kept them awake. What consequences was this affair destined to bring about? They could not imagine. Would it be necessary for them to come to a decision? Would the municipal authority, whom they represented, be compelled to interfere? Would they be obliged to order arrests to be made, that so great a scandal should not be repeated? All these doubts could not but trouble these soft natures, and on that evening, before separating, the two notables had decided to see each other the next day. On the next morning, then, before dinner, the burgomaster Van Trikas proceeded in person to the councillor Niklaus's house. He found his friend more calm. He himself had recovered his equanimity. "Nothing new?" asked Van Trikas. "Nothing new since yesterday," replied Niklaus. "And the doctor, Dominique Custos?" "I have not heard anything, either of him or of the advocate, André Schutt." After an hour's conversation, which consisted of 3 remarks which it is needless to repeat. The councillor and the burgomaster had resolved to pay a visit to Dr. Ox, so as to draw from him, without seeming to do so, some details of the affair. Contrary to all their habits, after coming to this decision, the 2 notables set about putting it into execution forthwith. They left the house and directed their steps towards Dr. Ox's laboratory, which was situated outside the town, near the Oudenarde Gate, the gate whose tower threatened to fall in ruins. They did not take each other's arms, but walked side by side, with a slow and solemn step, which took them forward but 13 inches per second. This was, indeed, the ordinary gait of the Quiquendonians, who had never, within the memory of man, seen anyone run across the streets of their town. From time to time, the 2 notables would stop at some calm and tranquil crossway, or at the end of a quiet street, to salute the passers-by. "Good morning, Monsieur the Burgomaster," said one. "Good morning, my friend," responded Van Trichas. "Anything new, Monsieur the Councillor?" asked another. "Nothing new," answered Nicholas. But by certain agitated motions and questioning looks, it was evident that the altercation of the evening before was known throughout the town. Observing the direction taken by Van Trichas, the most obtuse Quiquendonians guessed that the burgomaster was on his way to take some important step. The custos and shut affair was talked of everywhere, but the people had not yet come to the point of taking the part of one or the other. The advocate Shut, having never had occasion to plead in a town where attorneys and bailiffs only existed in tradition, had consequently never lost a suit. As for the Doctor Custos, he was an honorable practitioner, who, after the example of his fellow doctors, cured all the illnesses of his patients, except those of which they died, a habit unhappily acquired by all the members of all the faculties in whatever country they may practice. On reaching the Oudenarde Gate, the councillor and the burgomaster prudently made a short detour, so as not to pass within reach of the tower, in case it should fall. Then they turned and looked at it attentively. "I think that it will fall," said Van Trichas. "I think so too," replied Nicholas. "Unless it is propped up," added Van Trichas. "But must it be propped up? That is the question." "That is, in fact, the question." Some moments after, they reached the door of the gasworks. "Can we see Dr. Ox?" they asked. Dr. Ox could always be seen by the first authorities of the town, and they were at once introduced into the celebrated physiologist's study. Perhaps the 2 notables waited for the doctor at least an hour. At least it is reasonable to suppose so, as the burgomaster, a thing that had never before happened in his life, betrayed a certain amount of impatience, from which his companion was not exempt. Dr. Ox came in at last, and began to excuse himself for having kept them waiting, but he had to approve a plan for the gasometer, rectify some of the machinery, but everything was going on well. The pipes intended for the oxygen were already laid. In a few months the town would be splendidly lighted. The 2 notables might even now see the orifices of the pipes which were laid on in the laboratory. Then the doctor begged to know to what he was indebted for the honor of this visit. "Only to see you, doctor, to see you," replied Van Trichas. "It is long since we have had the pleasure. We go abroad but little in our good town of Quiquendone. We count our steps and measure our walks. We are happy when nothing disturbs the uniformity of our habits." Nicholas looked at his friend. His friend had never said so much at once, at least, without taking time, and giving long intervals between his sentences. It seemed to him that Van Trichas expressed himself with a certain volubility, which was by no means common with him. Nicholas himself experienced a kind of irresistible desire to talk. As for Dr. Ox, he looked at the burgomaster with sly attention. Van Trichas, who never argued until he had snugly ensconced himself in a spacious armchair, had risen to his feet. I know not what nervous excitement, quite foreign to his temperament, had taken possession of him. He did not gesticulate as yet, but this could not be far off. As for the councillor, he rubbed his legs and breathed with slow and long gasps. His look became animated little by little, and he had decided to support at all hazards, if need be, his trusty friend the burgomaster. Van Trichas got up and took several steps. Then he came back and stood facing the doctor. "And in how many months," he asked in a somewhat emphatic tone, "do you say that your work will be finished?" "In 3 or 4 months, Monsieur the Burgomaster," replied Dr. Ox. "3 or 4 months, it's a very long time," said Van Trichas. Altogether too long, added Nicholas, who, not being able to keep his seat, rose also. This lapse of time is necessary to complete our work, returned Dr. Ox. The workmen, whom we have had to choose in Quiquendone, are not very expeditious. The workmen, whom we have had to choose in Quiquendone, are not very expeditious. How not expeditious? Cried the burgomaster, who seemed to take the remark as personally offensive. No, Monsieur Van Trichas, replied Dr. Ox obstinately. A French workman would do in a day what it takes 10 of your workmen to do. You know they are regular Flemings. Flemings, cried the counselor, whose fingers closed together. In what sense, sir, do you use that word? Why, in the amiable sense in which everybody uses it, replied Dr. Ox, smiling. Ah, but doctor, said the burgomaster, pacing up and down the room, I don't like these insinuations. The workmen of Quiquendone are as efficient as those of any other town in the world, you must know, and we shall go neither to Paris nor London for our models. As for your project, I beg you to hasten its execution. Our streets have been unpaved for the putting down of your conduit pipes, and it is a hindrance to traffic. Our trade will begin to suffer, and I, being the responsible authority, do not propose to incur reproaches which will be but too just. Worthy burgomaster, he spoke of trade, of traffic, and the wonder was that those words, to which he was quite unaccustomed, did not scorch his lips. What could be passing in his mind? Besides, added Nicholas, the town cannot be deprived of light much longer. But, urged Dr. Ox, a town which has been unlighted for 800 or 900 years. All the more necessary is it, replied the burgomaster, emphasizing his words. Times alter, manners alter. The world advances, and we do not wish to remain behind. We desire our streets to be lighted within a month, or you must pay a large indemnity for each day of delay. And what would happen if, amid the darkness, some affray should take place? No doubt, cried Nicholas. It requires but a spark to inflame a Fleming, flame. Apropos of this, said the burgomaster, interrupting his friend, Commissary Passoff, our chief of police, reports to us that a discussion took place in your drawing room last evening, Dr. Ox. Was he wrong in declaring that it was a political discussion? By no means, Monsieur the Burgomaster, replied Dr. Ox, who with difficulty repressed a sigh of satisfaction. So an altercation did take place between Dominique Gustos and André Schutt. Yes, counselor, but the words which passed were not of grave import. Not of grave import, cried the burgomaster. Not of grave import, when one man tells another that he does not measure the effect of his words. But of what stuff are you made, monsieur? Do you not know that in Quiquendone nothing more is needed to bring about extremely disastrous results? But monsieur, if you, or anyone else, presume to speak thus to me. Or to me, added Nicholas. As they pronounced these words with a menacing air, the two notables, with folded arms and bristling air, confronted Dr. Ox, ready to do him some violence if by a gesture, or even the expression of his eye, he manifested any intention of contradicting them. But the doctor did not budge. At all events, monsieur, resumed the burgomaster, I propose to hold you responsible for what passes in your house. I am bound to ensure the tranquillity of this town, and I do not wish it to be disturbed. The events of last evening must not be repeated, or I shall do my duty, sir. Do you hear? Then reply, sir. The burgomaster, as he spoke, under the influence of extraordinary excitement, elevated his voice to the pitch of anger. He was furious, the worthy Van Trichas, and might certainly be heard outside. At last, beside himself, and seeing that Dr. Ox did not reply to his challenge, Come, Nicholas, said he. And slamming the door with a violence which shook the house, the burgomaster drew his friend after him. Little by little, when they had taken 20 steps on their road, the worthy notables grew more calm. Their pace slackened, their gait became less feverish. The flush on their faces faded away, from being crimson they became rosy. A quarter of an hour after quitting the gasworks, Van Trichas said softly to Nicholas, an amiable man, Dr. Ox, it is always a pleasure to see him. In Chapter 6, in which France Nicholas and Suzel Van Trichas form certain projects for the future. Our readers know that the burgomaster had a daughter, Suzel, but shrewd as they may be, they cannot have divined that the councillor Nicholas had a son, France. And had they divined this, nothing could have led them to imagine that France was the betrothed lover of Suzel. We will add that these young people were made for each other, and that they loved each other, as folks did love at Quiquendone. It must not be thought that young hearts did not beat in this exceptional place, only they beat with a certain deliberation. There were marriages there, as in every other town in the world, but they took time about it. Betrothed couples, before engaging in these terrible bonds, wished to study each other, and these studies lasted at least 10 years, as at college. It was rare that anyone was accepted before this lapse of time. Yes, 10 years, the courtships last 10 years. And is it, after all, too long, when the being bound for life is in consideration? One studies 10 years to become an engineer or physician, an advocate or attorney, and should less time be spent in acquiring the knowledge to make a good husband? Is it not reasonable? And, whether due to temperament or reason with them, the Quickwindonians seem to us to be in the right in thus prolonging their courtship. When marriages in other more lively and excitable cities are seen taking place within a few months, we must shrug our shoulders and hasten to send our boys to the schools and our daughters to the pensions of Quickwindone. For half a century, but a single marriage was known to have taken place after the lapse of 2 years only of courtship, and that turned out badly. Frans Niklaus, then, loved Suzel van Tricus, but quietly, as a man would love when he has 10 years before him in which to obtain the beloved object. Once every week, at an hour agreed upon, Frans went to fetch Suzel and took a walk with her along the banks of the Var. He took good care to carry his fishing tackle, and Suzel never forgot her canvas, on which her pretty hands embroidered the most unlikely flowers. Frans was a young man of 22, whose cheeks betrayed a soft, peachy down, and whose voice had scarcely a compass of 1 octave. As for Suzel, she was blonde and rosy. She was 17 and did not dislike fishing. A singular occupation this, however, which forces you to struggle craftily with a barbel. But Frans loved it. The pastime was congenial to his temperament. As patient as possible, content to follow with his rather dreamy eye the cork which bobbed on the top of the water, he knew how to wait. And when, after sitting for 6 hours, a modest barbel, taking pity on him, consented at last to be caught, he was happy, but he knew how to control his emotion. On this day the two lovers, one might say, the two betrothed, were seated upon the verdant bank. The limpid Var murmured a few feet below them. Suzel quietly drew her needle across the canvas. Frans automatically carried his line from left to right, then permitted it to descend the current from right to left. The fish made capricious rings in the water, which crossed each other around the cork, while the hook hung useless near the bottom. From time to time, Frans would say, without raising his eyes, "I think I have a bite, Suzel." "Do you think so, Frans?" replied Suzel, who, abandoning her work for an instant, followed her lover's line with earnest eye. "And no," resumed Frans, "I thought I felt a little twitch, I was mistaken." "You will have a bite, Frans," replied Suzel in her pure, soft voice, "but do not forget to strike at the right moment. You are always a few seconds too late, and the barbel takes advantage to escape." "Would you like to take my line, Suzel?" "Willingly, Frans." "Then give me your canvas. We shall see whether I am more adroit with the needle than with the hook." And the young girl took the line with trembling hand, while her swain plied the needle across the stitches of the embroidery. For hours together they thus exchanged soft words, and their hearts palpitated when the cork bobbed on the water. Ah, could they ever forget those charming hours, during which, seated side by side, they listened to the murmurs of the river. The young girl took the line. The sun was fast approaching the western horizon, and despite the combined skill of Suzel and Frans, there had not been a bite. The barbels had not shown themselves complacent, and seemed to scoff at the two young people, who were too just to bear them malice. "We shall be more lucky another time, Frans," said Suzel, as the young angler put up his still virgin hook. "Let us hope so," replied Frans. Then walking side by side, they turned their steps towards the house, without exchanging a word, as mute as their shadows which stretched out before them. Suzel became very, very tall under the oblique rays of the setting sun. Frans appeared very, very thin, like the long rod which he held in his hand. They reached the burgomaster's house. Green tufts of grass bordered the shining pavement, and no one would have thought of tearing them away, for they deadened the noise made by the passers-by. As they were about to open the door, Frans thought it his duty to say to Suzel, "You know, Suzel, the great day is approaching." "It is indeed, Frans," replied the young girl with downcast eyes. "Yes," said Frans, "in 5 or 6 years." "Goodbye, Frans," said Suzel. "Goodbye, Frans," said Suzel. "Goodbye, Suzel," replied Frans. and after the door had been closed, the young man resumed the way to his father's house with a calm and equal pace. Chapter 7.